Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Prodigal Son. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, this is a very interesting case where basically they're kind of dealing with a serial killer because there's a previous victim prior to the episode that kind of went through this, what would they call him, like the bridal butcher or something like that. And obviously Ainsley is on the case and everything. Obviously she wants to do the report to it, but obviously she's treating this like a game, which even she's like, oh, come on, Malcolm, I saw you walking up kind of giddy, because obviously he gets excited about murder because, I mean, and it's so interesting because both of them want something outside of the murder. Like, she does it out of the fulfillment of like, hey, this is for my job and everything. She makes it seem like that's all she's doing it for. Malcolm does it because I think it gives him a purpose. It gives him something to do to kind of get, like, catching killers, diving headfirst into that darkness, solving a mystery, a riddle. I think it keeps his mind off his own stuff. So each one of them's, trying to deal with their own stuff in their own way. And obviously the reactions, him getting so excited about a murder, even Gil's like, really? Because it's like, Malcolm being like, who needs to sleep? Sleep is overrated. And Gil was like, most people would heavily disagree with you. But it's like his reaction to it, Ainsley being like, oh, it's a game. Like, she's trying to like win this. It's something like in her mind, it's like solving this case is something to win, which we saw in the intro that Jessica was having a nightmare back in 98 of when like Ainsley went missing. It's like her and Malcolm were playing hiding and go seek, and she stayed hidden in a clock. And it's like, well, she's like, what were you doing? It's like, I was hiding. Like, Malcolm couldn't find me, so I won, right? That like showing you to what length she's willing to go to win. And obviously that being the overarching theme of this episode. Obviously, I love that we do get a little bit more Idrissa this episode, because obviously JT's dealing with that whole situation, and apparently Danny's kind of off with Vice right now. But I love Idrissa being like, it goes like, what do you got? And she's like, oh, I got this. It's mixed with this. And she's like, oh, it will mess you up. She's like, but in a good way. And then Gil kind of gives her a look, and she's like, oh, you were talking about the body, weren't you? And he's like, yes. But it turns out like there's no like actual outward marks on the body. Even like there's like she had like a birthmark or a mole or whatever that got covered up, and it's like, huh. And the case gets even more interesting because obviously Idrissa the entire episode is like pumping back like stuff to like not she's trying to stay awake, which is interesting. That ended up being kind of a theme of the episode a little bit too. But it turns out the victim they found this episode, she actually had heterochromia, which it turns out, but it's like when we discovered the body, she had two blue eyes, and it turns out one of the eyes was fake. They replaced it with a doll's eye, which also I love that she's like, oh, like she's making like a sports reference, and neither Gil nor Malcolm is catching it, and she's like, oh, where's JT when you need him in this situation? I love it. It was so interesting because could you also notice like when she's bringing up, she had blue eyes, and she's looking at Malcolm all dreamy, like, oh, like almost like she's getting lost in his blue eyes. It almost seemed like that, but she was just kind of like, I think she was trying to take herself out of that by being like, oh yeah, just like this other person. I think she was trying to distract, like pull away, because she probably found herself kind of caught up in Malcolm's eyes a little bit to a certain extent. But it turns out that basically the killer, because it turns out this isn't like a bridal situation, because Ainsley's the one that actually points out, because they couldn't find any stores that sold dresses like this, but it turns out it's because they're debutante dresses. And so it all connects to Ainsley, because Ainsley went to a debutante type of school about etiquette and stuff like that called Windsor, and it turns out these ladies have a connection to Windsor. They all went there. Well, at this point in time, the two victims, eventually the third victim, Violet, ended up going there as well. That situation, like, once again, this show just amps up the creepy, especially because like Violet was sitting like straight up, and then both her eyes were cut out, and it's just like, ugh. Some other interesting things were the fact that you had Jessica going to talk to Martin about everything. It's like, because she didn't realize Martin already knew about Ainsley. I mean, in retrospect, it's like, well, she knew that he knew, because now in retrospect, it makes his comments make it sink in her head, like, oh, you knew, but she didn't realize it's, oh, Malcolm that told you. It's like, granted, I don't think she still knows that Malcolm's the one that disposed of Endicott's body, slicing it up, and I don't think she knows all that, but I guess it's like, even if she does, she probably thought Malcolm did it on her own, probably not realizing he was on the phone with his dad when he was doing that. But for her, it's like she's out of the loop and everything, and now she's so concerned and scared because she's like, what's happening to my daughter? I got to get her away from you. It's like, because it's like, for her, it's like she's already got one child so neck deep in murder. The last thing that she wants is another, especially because, you know, she's scared to, like, you know, I think she's always kind of felt like there was something with Ainsley, but like I said, Malcolm was the one that always got the attention in that regard of, like, she was always more scared for him, but now it's like she's worried that, like, Ainsley, because of what Malcolm said last episode, she's worried that Ainsley might go off the deep end, that it might be even worse than what's going on with Malcolm, because at least Malcolm hasn't killed anyone. Yes, he has his trauma, he has his issues, but at least he's never killed anyone. Now it's like, my daughter is a murderer, and I need to get her away from you. You're a cancer. The closer they get to you, the more it spreads. And he's like, you know, and it actually kind of made me laugh. Martin be like, you know, that's not how cancer works, right? It's like, you get what she's saying, you asshole, but it's like him just being the doctor that he is. Like, you know, that's not how cancer works, right? But for her, it's like, I'm going to get her away. We're going to go on a little vacation. Just get her away from all of this. But when Martin's talking to Malcolm, and Malcolm's finding out his mom realizes everything that's going on now, she knows. It's like, for him, it's like, there's no way Ainsley's going to leave, especially with how big this case has become, especially considering the case is something connected to her. She's definitely not going to walk away from it. And it's like, so mom's attempt to get her away from us, get away from all of this, isn't going to work out. But even Malcolm's thinking, like, you know, Windsor had its own issues when it came to Ainsley because she got rejected by so many people because, hey, you're the surgeon's daughter, which I thought was so neat because, not neat, but it's just like storytelling-wise, because in episode 3, 2 episodes ago, we learned Malcolm's issues, that the issues of kind of like his history coming out. And granted, it's kind of a similar thing, like how he kind of lost himself and attacked a dude that like locked him in that closet for all those. So it's almost similar, like, because I was thinking to myself, I was like, yeah, Malcolm is severely messed up, and even Jessica says this later on, that Ainsley might be even more messed up than Malcolm, which is saying a lot. But in retrospect now, when you think about Malcolm's reaction, how he handled that, granted, he snapped out of it and was like, oh, I need help for this guy, then, like, you know, what Ainsley's done, there's definitely a similar path that they've taken, but it seems like Ainsley kind of went, in that one instant, Ainsley went full force forward, whereas Malcolm kind of backed down, you know? So at least some part of Malcolm was able to kind of pull back. So, but he was suggesting, like, oh, maybe like you getting arrested, but Martin was like, no, your sister has always been like that kind of competitive spirit and stuff like that, and it's like that drive, and he's like, let me guess, because she's her father's daughter, and he's like, no, because she's your mother's, which is interesting, because obviously he always makes a point that, like, hey, Malcolm is kind of like father like son. Obviously, in this case, it seems a lot more like father like daughter. But he's kind of, I guess he's saying it's a little bit of like she's taking a little bit of him and a little bit of Jessica. Ainsley's taking a little bit of him and a little bit of Jessica, and that's kind of created this concoction of what she is and who she is. She ended up going to end up at Windsor first, and she's like, oh, you're just mad because I got here first. I'm winning. He's like, there is no winning. 2 people have been murdered, Ainsley. Like, how does that make you feel? She's like, it's awful. She's like, why? And it's like, why are you asking me that? And it's like, Malcolm had to catch himself because it's like, because in that moment he's flashing back to life. Because for him, it's like, the fact is you're willing to look at this as like a game for him. Like, yeah, he has his own approach to the whole murder situation, but at least, like, I guess he's thinking, like, at least I have some form of sympathy. Now he's kind of worried that, like, maybe on some level he's worried that, like, yeah, at least I have some of my humanity. I have my humanity intact, where it's like, yeah, like, murder, I use it as a means of, like, you know, solving murders as a means of dealing with my own stuff, but at least I recognize, like, I see people for who they are and stuff like that. But I think for him, he's worried that, like, Ainsley's going to stop seeing people as people. That's just like, oh, these are just these murder victims are just a means to an end. So he's almost trying to test whether or not she has any, like, sympathy or empathy. And he's like, no, he's like, right, I just, you know, he's just like, all this is just a reminder of all the people that rejected us. For him, he's like, etiquette doesn't mean anything. It's really just a means of hiding the truth, you know, underneath. Which obviously the lady, Sarah, who runs the place, was kind of talking about, like, oh, like, how, I forgot, she was kind of referencing how Europeans, like, how etiquette meant something to them, which is like, oh yeah, and that also eventually led to colonialism, and just, you know, how that all played out. So being like etiquette, is a nice fancy way of kind of covering up the truth. You want to be proper and everything, but obviously the Europeans back in the day did a lot of fucked up shit. So it's like you can't like put the pretense of like, oh, this is all like etiquette and prim and proper and stuff like that. But also like you can tell Ainsley was a little hurt by the fact is that not hurt but just bugged that like Malcolm was able to kind of get a little step closer in investigation because he's like, hey, you don't want police sniffing around your business? Like, I can keep them away if you give me access to your files and stuff. So Ainsley looked at it as like, damn, well, of course that's going to work. You got the upper hand in this particular case. But then later on, she's in her dad's office, like, working on stuff. And, Jessica's like, no, maybe you should get away. It's just, I don't like you down here working down this. But she's like, oh, but Mom, this job is so important. Like, I need to be the one that solve it and stuff like that. But, like, obviously for Jessica, it's like that's what worries her the most, like, that you're so neck deep in this. She finds the body, but she reports it to the police, but not before taking a video. And then, like, Malcolm and Gil are like, what the hell are you doing, Ainsley? Why the hell would you do that? You find a dead body. Yeah, you report it to the cops, but you immediately cut a promo with it? And she's like, oh, yeah, like, everyone at the station, like, oh, they're trying to, like, offer me and get me a better deal and stuff like that. It's like, the way she's looking at this is like, I don't care too much about the fact that I found a body. It's more so almost like you're focusing more on how it benefits you. But we've seen this side of Ainsley. Like I said, it's so interesting because, like, you look back on season 1, the whole situation with her boyfriend getting stabbed, and, like, remember he was so upset when he found out, like, wait, you were filming that entire thing? It's like, I mean, she wasn't too hurt about their breakup either. So it's like the thing of, like, oh, like, kind of showing you, like, how laser focused she can be on certain things, like, kind of, season 1 kind of already hinted and showed you some of that detachment that Ainsley kind of has, and obviously it's gotten worse. And even to the point that Gil was kind of picking up on it. It's like, yeah, something's not right. The moment, like, Jessica got there, she was like, oh, Ainsley, oh God, is she involved? And Gil's like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And Jessica's like, yeah, I'm just so confused, everything that's going on. It's like, he's like, yeah, like, you're at an 11 and so is Malcolm, and even the way Ainsley's acting, he's like, I've never seen any of that. So it was like, what's going on here? It's like, well, I've been talking to her dad. Wait, you went to see Martin? She's like, I know it's not a smart idea. He's like, no, come to me with that. But she's like, oh, I miss Ainsley. I showed up at the wrong time. But Gil being like, no, you showed up at the right time. You ran into me. So it's like, Gil's still trying to recapture, like, what's between him and Jessica. But obviously for her, she's got too much on her mind, especially because it's like, well, you definitely can't get close to Gil now because you got the big secret of, hey, my daughter killed Endicott and my son helped cover it up. And it's like, if I don't want anything bad to happen to my daughter, I gotta keep this to myself. I can't really confide in anyone about this, Because it's not like she can even necessarily confide in Martin about it necessarily either, because Martin's kind of relishing in this because obviously it's like, oh, my kids, oh, they're going to be fine. He's like, oh, look at this, Malcolm, isn't it fun? You're getting away with it. And it's like Ainsley, it's like, he's thinking like, oh, maybe she'll even be thankful if she finds out the truth. But for Malcolm, it's like, this isn't fun, and he doesn't want this on his sister. He doesn't know what this will do to her because he's scared that it's going to push her over the edge and she won't be the same person anymore. That, once again, he's struggling with the whole, our dad being a part of us, and he's worried about, like, granted, he's been messed up his entire life, and I guess you can make the argument Ainsley technically has been too, and even later on saying, like, I have just as much as right as you to be messed up by, our family circumstances. But she ended up figuring out something before, the others did. Luckily, Adrisa's showing up because, like, the fact that she's checking her pulse, and it's like, he's like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, well, you know that point where you're drinking so much because you're staying up so late dealing with all these bodies, and now you have to check your own gums because you can't feel them. And she's helping him out and everything with the case, and she kind of pointed something out, and she knew, like, oh, this number, it's like, yeah, it's a very, like, old school number, and it turns out it's connected to Windsor. And I love her being like, oh, can I come? And he's like, absolutely not. But Ainsley was already there. She's sitting down with Sarah. The moment she's sitting down with Sarah and, like, the drink is getting prepared beforehand, I was like, that's not Sarah, that's Rachel. I pretty much figured it was. Oh, I should also note, the actress who played Sarah, I was like, I've seen her in stuff before, but what clearly came to my mind eventually during the episode, I was like, right, she was in Scandal, which obviously Bellamy Young, the actress who plays Jessica, was also in Scandal, so I thought it was interesting. I don't remember how much of the show she's in. I think she pops in from time to time. I remember at one point in time she's running for president against the president because I think it's during a re-election. It's been forever since I've seen Scandal, and I never finished a show. I was a couple seasons behind, but it clicked in my head. Like I said, I know I've seen her in other stuff. I think most recently was It was Supergirl, because she played Nia's mom, if I'm not mistaken. I think she played Nia's mom in Supergirl. I think that's the most recent thing I saw her in. But yeah, like the scandal connection, I thought that was pretty interesting. But luckily Malcolm shows up and down, and I like that whole thing he did against Sarah, where she would like close the door. He's like, "Whoa!" He's like, "Oh, you want me to leave? Like, you show me the door and you do it gracefully or whatever." Like, he turned the whole etiquette thing against her. But then it's like, Sarah kind of realizes like who's behind all this, because she's like, I've never used that number to call anyone, and then she realizes it was Rachel. Luckily Malcolm was able to get to Rachel, but at the same time, like, Rachel's doing her whole thing with Ainsley, but then like Sarah is doing her thing as well, like, where it's like she's talking about how like, oh, like, she kind of talks about like her one mistake. I think it was because she talks about like what she really wanted, what she was trying to do, why she was getting contact with all the previous students, is because that school, Windsor, was running out of money, and she's like, oh, basically etiquette's kind of a lost and dying art. Like, it used to be so relished, but now it's just kind of like thrown to a forgotten. She's kind of part of a forgotten age that no one kind of latches onto anymore. So we kind of find out why Rachel's done what she's done, because for Rachel, like, she's her own daughter, but it's like she never got the love and attention, because it's like, because Sarah made the whole point, like, oh, all my students, they've been like children to me, but it's like she treated these women, these other late women, more like her daughters rather than her own daughter, even going as far, in Malcolm's case, it's like, that's why you lashed out at them, because these women who rejected the love that your mom didn't give to you but gave to them, they rejected it, so you lashed out towards them, because the whole etiquette thing is about being perfect, so that's why she's done what she's done to them, to make them all perfect, And that moment was so interesting, because Ainsley pops up and then she's got the thing in her hand, which obviously Malcolm's worried, because it's like, hey, last time my sister had something sharp in her hand, things got stabby, super bloody. But it's like, in that moment, it seemed like she snapped out of it, but it's like, we don't know whether she kind of had like a dissociative moment in that instance, because the moment she got hit, but like accident, like when Rachel pistol whipped her and then like the gun went off, it almost seemed like, oh, she snapped out of whatever trance she was in. It seemed like in that moment, like, she slipped into it. Malcolm didn't really comment on it, so it's like, it's hard to say whether she was just doing that like, hey, I got this, I'm about to defend myself, but Malcolm's worried, like, even if it's in self-defense, you're taking her down, it's like, but you doing this, like, especially you doing something that's going to be stabby and bloody, is going to trigger that, and he's scared. I mean, to be fair, he's scared like another thing is going to send her even further down the road, so he's going to probably try to prevent her to ever be in a situation where she has to kill someone again. But luckily they were able to get out of there before Sarah blew the place up. I guess for her it was just kind of like, it's like, oh, like, my own daughter did this, like, she felt like, oh, all that she represented and stood for, it was all for nothing, because what she had built up, it was a dying art to a certain extent, and it was not worth it. Like, it's really hard to understand. I think if you probably go back through her monologue, it probably makes a little bit more sense. But I think for her, it's just, I didn't see what was happening before me, and just like, it all needs to be burned down, and she can't live with like her failures, her mistakes. But whatever the case may be, luckily it all worked out. And Ainsley's looking at it like hey, I guess I won, because I figured it out first, because it turns out like, which I forgot that was I think shows have referenced that. I forgot that's actually a real thing, because I remember like watching a JK News years ago when he talked about like they cut for an article that talked about the nails that lets ladies, like, it changes color, or I think it changes, like, the nail changes color to let you know, like, oh, your drink has been spiked. I forgot that was like a real life thing. Like, I guess because I don't hear about it a lot, I think probably if I was a lady, I'd probably be more aware of it, but as a dude, it doesn't, like, I don't think it would naturally come up in my own life. I guess if I wore nails, it would, but I don't wear nails, so, but like, I forgot that was a thing, But regardless, for him, he's still worried about it. It's like, yeah, but you're still treating this like a game, because like he actually had this interesting conversation with Ainsley, about Ainsley, where it's like, hiding the truth. He's like, I'm worried, that hiding the truth might cause more harm, because now he's thinking like, especially because Ainsley's kind of spiraling, because she's trying to figure things out, and he's thinking because she can't figure out like whatever it is that we're keeping from her, now she's trying to like find some resolution in something else, like solving this case or whatever. It's like, she doesn't realize it, but on some subconscious level, because she can't figure out whatever it is that Malcolm is keeping from her, their dad is keeping from her, and now like her mom is acting extra weird too. It's like there's something there, but no one's telling me. It's a big secret that the entire family is keeping from me, and on some level, she wanted to solve this case because it's like she can't solve whatever this whole thing is, but like, oh, here's something else I can actually solve. So that's what I'm thinking it's kind of getting at. But then her telling Malcolm like, hey, I have every right to be, just as messed up too. My dad was a serial killer as well, but it's like, makes you wonder, because Malcolm's probably still in the phase of like, well, what do I do? Like, do I keep lying to her? Because he's probably thinking like, the more I lie, because even he had confronted his dad, it was like, yeah, what you want me to do, chloroform her? And it's like, okay, here you go, Malcolm, bring it up. And he's like, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that in the best way. Like, what do you want me to do, keep apologizing for? I'm trying to even remember. I was like, did you even fully properly apologize for the whole chloroforming him thing, which obviously that didn't work out because that created a lot of subconscious issues too. But it's like the same thing of like covering up. Oh, you're putting a Band-Aid on a giant open wound, and it's like it's not just going to close up. The Band-Aid's only temporary. I guess you're hoping for it you're hoping that it doesn't even leave a scar. It's kind of, if it were to keep the metaphor going. But that's definitely an interesting development in that, right? And it's like, okay, so it's going to be interesting to see what Malcolm kind of does, especially because Jessica goes to Martin yet again, and it's like, hey, we need to work together as a team. We cannot, like, she's like, in this moment, stop talking like this monster you become and become the man I fell in love with. We have to help our children before they're so lost, because it's like, if this whole thing spirals out, like, they could both end up arrested or worse. And it's like, help me save our children before they go off the edge. And he was like, I'll do whatever it takes to protect my family, which it's almost interesting because it's almost working like that dream he had, that turned into a nightmare like a couple episodes. No, that was last week's episode, wasn't it? The nightmare and everything. Yeah, I think it was, yeah. But in that regard, like, he was seeing Jessica being like, oh, happy, and it's like, oh, let's have sex and everything, until Malcolm kind of ruined it. Maybe there's going to be some aspect to that. I'm wondering, is it going to be him trying to manipulate the situation? I mean, granted, once again, we know that he still has 2 of the cards. All he needs is 1 more, so he's probably going to try and... I still think he's going to bust out and probably try to go on a run with Ainsley. I don't know, because for him it's like, I can't be behind the walls. If I had to do whatever it takes to protect my family, which I think even includes Jessica, because he still loves her in his own twisted way. So it's like, oh, we can be happy, full home and family, which I don't think that's going to be necessarily good for Gil. Well, for one, Jessica keep making a secret pact with him. It's like, come to me if you need anything. Don't rely on him. But you kind of have to rely on him, because this is something you can't tell Gil about, because he's going to be in this compromised position as a cop of like, what does he do with all of this, especially with Malcolm helping cover it up. Now the entire family's involved in the cover-up, so that's definitely going to spiral out. And which is interesting, because obviously they became suspects. At least Malcolm became a suspect at the end of season 1, and I think maybe this season will end with the entire family being like, their involvement in this Endicott thing coming to the surface, and them all being suspects at the end. Very complicated family dynamic, and it might be something where they can only survive this if they come together as a family. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. Another aspect to this episode I didn't touch on either was the JT situation, because it's like, if he, for him, it's like, well, the circumstances are going to lead it to that, like, if he makes a complaint about it, or if he doesn't, like, I think it was like, if he does make a complaint, they both will get, suspended for like 20 days or something like that. But even Malcolm's like, why? You didn't do anything, but for JT, it's like the company will do it, the precinct will do whatever it needs to protect itself. But when the time came, it's like, well, do you want to make a complaint or not? And the cop is like, I'm not a racist, like, JT was heading towards a crime scene, and it's like he identified himself, but you weren't listening, calling him boy and everything like that. But at the end of it, JT's like, well, Malcolm's going to need backup, so we're getting out of here. And it's like, yeah, we're done here. He's like, I'm not going to file a complaint. But he's like, you are basically, the reason why you're like that, he's like, basically, you're miserable and you're angry, and that hatred, he's like, it's poisonous, and he's like, I'm not going to let it poison my life too. And so it's just kind of like, I'm not going to waste my energy on this. Like, you are the way you are because you're unhappy and you're miserable, and that's all on you. It's not going to affect me. You know, he's got a child at home. He's married and happy, and he's very good at what he does. I'm not going to let you kind of drag me down essentially with you. So I'm wondering, is there going to still be any retribution from that cop? Because he has that look on his face like, oh, like he says some shit that's true. Because JT definitely walked away from that being a bigger man. I even love Gil being like, now we're done. You know, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see what goes in there. But maybe I'm curious if there's going to be any more, like, any aftermath effects from this, you know. Granted, he didn't make any complaints, so it shouldn't be a situation where other cops turn against him, but I don't know if that cop's going to hold a vendetta and if that's going to be an issue later on, or maybe something potentially good could come from it. Maybe not, I don't know. Maybe this is where things ends on that storyline. I'm curious to see if there will be anything else that stems from it, but a lot of interesting things to keep in mind. I'm very curious to ultimately see where all of this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.